This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. This week, we're looking at two women's memoirs that tackle adulthood from nearly opposite ends. For comedian, actor, and writer Annabelle Gurwitch, the sandwich generation complications of turning 50 with a teenage child at home and aging parents to take care of are quite the bundle of obligations. But she deals with them humorously in her memoir, I See You Made an Effort. But going back nearly 20 years to when many in Generation X were entering careers in the 1990s with what appeared then to be a very uncertain future, Joanna Rakoff found herself in some very curious situations. She discusses them in her memoir, My Salinger Year. But first, here's my interview with Annabelle Gurwitch. You get to 30, you get to 40, but 50, some certain changes really start kicking in.
Well, there's like a biology change. The whole end of your fertile years that's just a real thing. And also, you start to see real things happening in people that you love's life. So one of the chapters I write about, and I think this is something that all my readers have told me they really related to, is this what's called the sandwich generation. And that is people who are raising kids, and at the same time as you have kids at home, your parents are getting older. And so you're the meat in the sandwich, right? And you're just pulled between these forces.
You talk about taking care of your parents in great detail and the kind of work that goes into that and the kind of transition that brings to yourself and your sense of self.
Anyone is going to relate to this as a Jewish value of being in the position where you're called upon to then take care of your parents. And honestly, I didn't have a picture of myself doing that when I was younger. I was just really busy in my life, I think I live a pretty normal life in that we're a two-career home. This is a very common story. But we were so busy in our careers with our son and, and being involved in family, but I hadn't had a picture of myself assuming that role yet. And so I write about seeing my mother who's been fighting breast cancer and, being the person who goes to the hospital with her and has to keep doing the mothering position.
And going with that sense of Jewish values,
yes.
You had the experience that probably a lot of Jewish families have had, which is when the old immigrant kind of merchant identity fuses with a 20th century American identity.
I do write about that because I think it's a story that a lot of us will relate to because I'm second generation. We had families who came here with very little. And so they had a very, let's say, varied existence of figuring out how to establish an American identity. And I think it's a real American Jewish story. My family was not very happy about me writing that.
In the sense that, were they not unhappy because it was about poverty? Were they unhappy because it was about, to a degree, scheming?
It was about poverty. It was about real struggle. And I think that, people particularly in my parents' generation, I think have been very concerned all their lives with striving to have a better life, and there's a lot of struggle. But I'm always thinking about I don't want to do damage to my family, but I also want to write about this because I think it's a theme that it's a very Jewish American story.
And this idea of legacy amid transition, you talk about that a bit. Like for example, your parents driving, and at one point you note that if you really wanted to give your child a secure future, you would make sure to be in the 1%, but you can't be.
Right.
And so, trying to struggle with that idea of legacy and what can you leave your children, and seeing what your parents are leaving you at the same time.
How you make a life and pass on these values and this sort of sense of history to your children, and how you keep that going, I have no idea. But telling these stories, I think, is one way of keeping that tradition in the oral tradition and also in the written tradition.
And now, Joanna Rakoff discussing her Salinger Year. So it centers around this very quirky situation in which you found yourself, where coming out of grad school, and you found yourself at J.D. Salinger's literary agency.
That's right. I was told on my second day there, you will never hear from him. He's never going to call. He's never going to write. He's not going to come in. He's not going to become your friend. And if by some crazy chance he does call and gets put through to you, don't talk to him. Don't engage with him. Don't try to keep him on the phone. And then, of course, the day that I was told this, an hour later or something, he called. And I ended up talking to him pretty regularly. These
correspondences that you would get, some fascinating examples of people, known and unknown, writing in to say what they had to say to Salinger, or to share what they had to share with Salinger. Yeah, I mean, the letters really ran the gamut. It was kind of every age you can imagine, every class level you can imagine, letters from all over the world. There were, people seem to assume that most of the letters were from teenagers, angry teenagers, but they really weren't. There were plenty of them from teenagers. They weren't necessarily angry, but just teenagers saying, I love you, or I love Holden, or I love Phoebe, and you're the only person who's really captured my feelings about growing up or just my life. But there were lots of other letters too, a lot from veterans of World War II who, of course, strongly related to the Seymour Glass stories, which are very much about the war. And then just a lot from people who had been through difficult experiences. And within that as well, from a more personal angle, you explore a relationship that you had, a pretty bad relationship with a pretty bad guy. And you explore this also in your novel, these that you get into these relationships where you find yourself kind of devoting yourself somewhat to their work, and particularly I think for women, where they find themselves subsumed in the career of a guy and it's hard to figure out whether that's going anywhere, and it's hard to figure out whether the relationship's going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a trope of the young woman who is flattered that the kind of, in quotes, genius guy who takes his own who believes he's a genius and takes his own genius so seriously, and also believes that his brilliance and genius is like a ticket to do whatever he wants. But you can't see it when you're in it, and you also, you're somehow you think like this person truly is a genius, or you also maybe have like a kind of girlish notion of what romantic love is, and that love needs to be accompanied by difficulty, or that it's like that fighting is a sign of passion. All of this is, of course, exacerbated by popular movies and fiction and what have you, and it's embarrassing, but it's real and so common.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPLING Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.